Hello, everyone. We are here with my girl Shea Bastida on the ones and twos, as I like to say. Um, we're talking about today the future of youth. Okay, so it is the Creators 2030 with Com26V and its partners. And Shea, and we've done a lot with Shea. We marched with Shea, and Fridays for Future last year was really cool. And we sat with Shea and Greta and all that, and it was really great. But this today is not about Shea, the celebrity, or whatever. It's about Shea and her thoughts, her real thoughts. She's a human being. She has some really good thoughts with a really good head on her shoulders. And we picked certain particular youth today that we know say what's on their mind and are not afraid to say it. So, Shea, we're looking at the future of youth, okay? A blueprint that organizations are putting together that's going to go beyond 2030, not just the SDGs, okay? And I want to find out from you, like, I wanted this to just be an open conversation, and we start where you want to start, whether it's poverty, whether it's food, whether it's, we're dealing with the indigenous as well. That's the main blueprint here, but it's everything fitting together. And you are indigenous as well. And so I want to know if you had a declaration in front of you and someone said to you, what you put down is going to happen. Like, no kidding, it's going to happen. And you taking this action to share with us what you want for the future, you being in college right now, you going through all that you have dealt with in your life, because you've dealt with some things that most adults haven't dealt with. I'm talking about older adults. You've seen things that older adults have, and you've embarked on challenges that a lot of people don't, it doesn't matter what age, have not embarked on. Okay? So if we had where we were writing a declaration right now, what area would you start with?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question because I feel like there are a lot of declarations that we already have that are not being upheld. So, for example, the Declaration on Indigenous Rights by the United Nations, it was put together um, for a long time, and it was finally put out to the world in 2007. So, since 2007, there's been a Declaration for Rights of Indigenous Peoples that basically has everything that Indigenous peoples have been asking for and are still asking for, but none of that is upheld. So I feel like if I had that opportunity to, write a declaration and whatever I write, that would happen, I think that I would write, uphold the declarations that we've already created in the past, that people have put a lot of effort into, that people have put a lot of thought into, that communities have put, um, communities have traveled across the world to come to conventions and write declarations for themselves that work for them. So that's something that I would like to see. And also to bring the intergenerational aspect into it, because I feel like even if youth are talked about, I feel like we're talked about like we're just this block that is like gonna get older, but I feel like we forget that there's youth coming up every single day. There's new babies being born every single day that are gonna become the youth in 10 years. So I want that to also be a factor in it. How do we make sure that all of us are working together and it's not only blocks that we're putting attention to? Like, I don't know where Gen Z is going to be in 10 years. I don't know who we're going to be, but I hope that we are a generation that, as we demand to be heard right now, is also going to hear the youth who are coming up and hear the adults who have paved the way for us.
I really love this, because Chia, you and I talked before about the intergenerational thing. You know what I mean? And I remember what I loved is that you can have a conversation and have different perspectives and maybe agree at some things and disagree. And since we've spoken, you and I agreed to disagree, I've now learned a lot, and that's why I say you can learn at every age. It doesn't matter. An adult should be open to learning. And I shouldn't say adult because you're an adult, but we all should be learning at every age, whether you're 99 or 1 years old. And so you working with all of you at Fridays for Future and Greta, you guys taught me so much because I was willing to learn. I wasn't willing to be stuck in my ways. Okay. And I thank you for being willing to learn from us. And this is what it is. For me, Shea, I want to stop calling out the age and just work together. You know what I mean? Because I work with young people, old people, whatever. I don't want to focus on their age. I want to focus on them as a human being. Now, I know there's some things that we all learn at different stages of our lives, but I just want to be able to work with, let's say, Shea, or I want to work with John Doe, who's maybe 90, and maybe Alexandra, who's 25 and 30 or whatever. I don't want to focus on the age. I want to focus on what we're committed to together, or just being friends. You know what I mean? And then there's certain age groups you do have to hang with because they may understand each other better. That's normal. Though that has always been normal. So that's what I want to go back to. I want to go into something that you powerfully said just now. Indigenous, okay? But before I even go there, the climate, okay? Poverty, okay? Because I know you spoke on poverty in underserved areas very much so. What I want you to write, I want you to tell us what you want on that declaration. And everyone, I want you to be clear. Do not take her words because these are her words and they're going into the declaration under Shea Bastida, no one else's name. I'm sorry, you know how I am, Shea. I want to be clear about that. So don't go and create something else. Allow this young woman's words to carry because we do that sometimes when we hear things. It's human nature. So I'm not calling it out, but allow her words to be her words. So Shea, what would you like to go into that declaration about poverty, access to organic fruits and vegetables, not pesticides, or health and well-being for all? I mean, I know I'm calling out some of the SDGs, but I remember you talking about this, and especially the underserved areas in New York and Mexico and other places. I want to hear what's on your mind about it.
Well, I also have learned a lot about communities who are in poverty recently. And something that really stuck out to me was the fact that a lot of communities who are experiencing poverty usually see success as moving out of their communities, right? So if you ask somebody from that community what their ideal success would look like, it probably is moving to a better area, moving to another city, or moving to another country, even. So I think that that is not what we should look at. We should look at how do we empower that community to actually flourish? How do we empower communities to not want to leave their communities, but actually build something that they are proud of? And we have a lot of things that perpetuate states of poverty in various communities across the US and the world. For example, there's a lot of pharmaceuticals, there's a lot of dollar stores, and that's where people get their food. So these are called food deserts, where people don't actually have access to fresh food. They only have access to processed things that ultimately affect their health, and that's why they have to go to the pharmaceuticals all the time. And it's just a cycle that they have a lot of junk food, a lot of things that are just going to keep people in that state of being unhealthy. And so and these are intentional, right? So we have to recognize that concentrated poverty in communities is intentional. And we have to recognize that we can break that cycle as well. And that can be done through a lot of lenses. That can be done through a climate lens, through a food sovereignty lens, that can be done through a housing security lens, through like an anti-gentrification lens, and all of those things culminating to justice. So if I had to put something about poverty in a declaration, I would say, um, give communities the resources, the space, the autonomy to flourish, to actually see their community as the best it can be. Um, we don't want more money for low income housing. We want money for high quality housing. Um, all of these things that communities are lacking, and they're lacking empowerment, and they're lacking education into how can they can invest into things, and how they can create their own businesses, and they don't need companies to come in and take over. They can do it themselves.
What about, in particular, Shea, food, soil, climate? You know all about this, okay? And how the indigenous hold the keys to these things. What do you want to see on that declaration?
I mean, something that's super important, and I think this is always mentioned but never upheld, is prior and informed consent. So a lot of companies come into indigenous communities and say, we're going to come in and have this fracking facility or whatever it is. And there's no informed consent about the environmental impact statement, about how that's going to deplete the biocultural diversity of communities, about how that's going to drain resources, about how that's going to completely change the makeup of what community looks like, about how that's going to mean that hundreds, if not thousands, of workers have to come in and disrupt the social cohesivity of communities. So I feel like that's something that I would also like to see. When there's facilities that want to come into communities, you have to tell the communities everything that could be impacted. How their lifestyle can be impacted, how their culture can be impacted, their traditions, their ecosystems. And once that happens, the answer is usually you can't come into my community. So, and that's when we start rejecting the fossil fuel industry as a whole, which is what we need. Um, so also like empowering communities to know what industries they want in their communities, what industries are not going to affect the biocultural diversity of their communities, and what industries are actually socially conscious and not just driven by profit.
Health. Okay. Health is the next one. Okay. Now, while that is entwined in what you're saying, okay, it's not just health of like diabetes and high blood pressure, whatever. Can you speak to that in the native communities, the indigenous, and also the underserved areas of the black and the brown and Chinese and Hispanic and all those communities? Because underserved goes across the board. Okay. What would you say about well being and health? What do you want to see in that declaration?
Something that I've recently researched a lot about is, and this is a very specific case study, but I think that it can apply to a lot of different things. So I studied obviously, fracking, for example, has a lot of health impacts, um, from like air pollution, water pollution. People get sick really often, higher rates of cancer, um, all of those things. But also the psychological impacts of fracking are really, really strong, especially in indigenous communities and marginalized communities. So the noise of the fracking facility actually makes people underperform in school, for example. The light makes people have insomnia and they can't sleep. So there's a lot of things that go beyond immediate health issues that we have to look into. That includes psychological issues that come from uh, facilities that disrupt how the community functions. So I think that we have to expand our definition of what health means, first of all, so that we can have more developed impact statements, so that we can have social impact statements and psychological impact statements and empower communities with that information so that they know exactly what these facilities may cause. Um, and yeah, I think that's something that I would like to see on.
But inside of that, if you were to really get down to some like specific statements, okay, on food, health, poverty, even education, Shie, even education. Is there anything that's burning in you that it could be bad? It doesn't have to be a bad or good thing, but it's burning and yearning in you that you want to see done right away.
Oh yeah, for sure. I actually, in terms of education, now that you mention it, a lot of the times, the only access that communities have to education, indigenous communities have to education, is in the language of the official language of the country, for example. So then you force homogenization, you force social homogenization, and when communities lose their language, for example, if you force them to learn a new language and learn in that language, they actually lose a lot of the words that connect them to their culture. For example, there's a word in Otomi, the word for skin, actually is also the word for the outer layer of Mother Earth. So when you think about how important words are, just when looking at education, people lose their connection with what they know about the world when you switch their languages and you tell them that those are only dialects, for example, and that you don't need them. So that's why indigenous communities are super, super vulnerable to losing knowledge because of they're not allowed to use their language and learn in their language. So that's something that I would put in a declaration, uh, language rights. How do we actually recognize language and not have one proper or one overarching language that we all have to know? For example, it's always funny to me how in the US everybody expects people to know English, but not a lot of people go out of their way to learn another language, right? Um, and yeah, in terms of health, like have better health facilities for communities, also respect what they already know about how to treat themselves. So there's a lot of medicinal plants that are actually being privatized by companies. And how do you give people the sovereignty to own their health methods?
Wow, that's, when we talk about this brings us over to, again, I know I'm mentioning SDGs, but actually, Shay, this brings us over to sustainable cities.
Yes.
It really does. And since you are studying policy, okay, in what way do you want to ascertain and infiltrate policy to create new policies? If you could create new policies around sustainable cities, okay, what would that look like? What would, and then we'll go into climate, but what would that look like if you were instituting policies right now around sustainable cities?
I actually attended the World Urban Forum in 2017 that the whole forum was about cities. And everybody agreed that we need resilient cities, we need sustainable cities, we need inclusive cities, we need cities that are for people, not for cars, not for, we need cities that are for people. Um, and that means better public transportation, more safety. We don't want our cities to be over policed. We don't want our cities to just come in and kind of disrupt. I think that when I think about cities, I think of just concrete everywhere. And I think about a complete detachment from nature. And that doesn't have to be the case. Um, I advocated in that forum that I attended in Malaysia that when you build cities, you actually have to listen to the knowledge of communities who have been there historically. For example, in my hometown in Mexico, there was this plot of land that was really huge. So this university came in and said, "We want to build our university right there." And the community said, "You can't do that because there's a certain time of the year where that becomes, it's a wetland. So it becomes really, really wet and it just becomes kind of like a lagoon or something." And the university said, "No, we are going to have our architects look at the soil and it's all going to be fine." So they started building the university and then it started to sink into the ground because it was really unstable. So they lost millions of pesos, they lost labor, they lost time just because they didn't listen to the community. So I that's something that I want to see. Cities that are resilient, inclusive, intersectional, built for people, and that are built um, respecting and recognizing how the land works in that specific place.
What about peace and justice? What's your thoughts on that? And then we have to go to climate. How could we not go to climate? Okay, but peace and justice. Your thoughts on that? What policies would you institute right now?
I mean, when it comes to peace, I think that peace is a really abstract concept, but it can be anything and it can be a lot of things that are really important and that we need. So, peace means uh, non-violence. Peace means like joy, right? It means to not have violence, to be able to live your life as fully as you can. And for example, there's this case in what's the country? Oh no, Peru. Is it Peru? Peru and Colombia about the criminalization of coca leaves. So coca leaves are the leaves that cocaine comes from, and as we know, the U.S. is a really big consumer of cocaine, and That's and like it's not good. That's also something that we have to deal with. But coca leaves, people in some South American countries use them as traditional uh, things. They chew coca leaves traditionally, and it's something that represents community. That is how children are socialized. It's a very, very old, like 8,000 year old practice that people have been doing since forever. Um, and it was criminalized because of the demand that the US started to have for an altered form of coca leaves. And so it's, those are the type of things that we cannot allow. So we cannot bring violence into those countries because it's not their fault that there's a really big demand in Europe or the US. So I feel like the US, for example, had this really big war on drugs, and they would literally go to South American countries and completely destroyed communities. They created social unrest. They sent military support there, um, and instead of focusing on their own communities and how to make them healthy, how to empower them with knowledge about why drugs are bad and why we shouldn't be consuming them. So that's one of the things that means peace to me. How do you give people and communities their sovereignty to practice their traditional costumes without demonizing them and criminalizing them? And in communities in the US, we saw this really big movement a few months ago for Black Lives Matter, and I think that the climate community hasn't done. We have done a lot of work, I think, but it's not nearly enough to show the intersectionality between climate and racism, like environmental racism. How a lot of communities are targeted by companies because they see them as least empowered, because they see them as most expensible. So how do we turn that around? How do we make communities know that when a company comes in, it's because the company like doesn't care about their health, and that is not acceptable. So I want to see policies that actually recognize environmental racism and call it out for what it is, and say it's not acceptable that communities are being poisoned just because you want profit.
Sorry, we had a tech glitch there for a second. So we have 4 minutes left. Is there anything else, like with regards to oceans, water and sanitation, youth in general? Youth in general. Is there anything that you would like to share about that for youth in general? That you want to see policies enacted for youth or water and sanitation, gender equality, any of these things?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of these things that we've been talking about go together. So when it comes to water, for example, there's countries where water is privatized, where water is owned by companies, and then there's communities who don't have access to water because of that. And that's something that should not be acceptable either, right? We cannot privatize sacred elements or resources, as we have come to call them. And that's a really big issue because it limits communities' access to something that they've been used to, but also if you entrap a river, for example, rivers are known to like geologically just move around. They flow, they change courses, they like to move. And if a company comes in and tells the river you can't move anymore, I'm gonna build a path that you have to follow, that completely has really bad effects on ecosystems and how the ecosystem is supposed to work. And that also has to do a lot with gender equality because, for example, in some countries, it is the tradition that women have to go get water. And if there's more drought, if there's less access to public owned water, women have to walk longer periods of times, which exposes them to abuse and, stalking and other things that women go through in a lot of different places around the world. So it's really about, you know, gender equality, gender justice, water justice all go together. And when it comes to youth, I think that we have to have a policy that says we have to respect not only the 7 generations past, but 7 generations forward, which is something that is very prominent in indigenous philosophy.
Shea, what can I say? I'm so proud of you. Just really so proud of who you are. You know, from the first time we met, you continue to blow me away. Seriously, not just because of the words you speak, but people don't know that we know about you personally, and that you don't just talk the talk, you walk the walk. Okay, we've seen it. You've been consistent. You follow through on what you say, and you are very smart to weed out the people who are just out to be around you for celebrityism, and the ones who you know are real. And I appreciate the fact that you allow my partners and I to be within that space with you, not from a pleading point of view, but that you allow it because you know that we really care about you, number one, and number two, just because of the work that you do. I wish, and I'm going to say this and I'm going to get myself in trouble, but I wish that some of the adults had the smarts that you have and the common sense. And so I truly thank you for the work that you continue to do. Where do you see yourself in the future?
I mean, I think that I don't have that many plans for the future, like tangible, but I want to finish school, and then I want to get a master's degree, and then I want to keep working. Like, I don't think I can predict what's going to happen, so I'm just um my plan is to always be there, right? Always keep moving, always do my best, always respond to what I think communities and the planet needs. So I see my future more as like a service. I am here to help out and help as the best I can, and to educate people who want to be climate activists as well. And I'm gonna do that through, you know, not only educating myself through my years in college, but also beyond.
Um, when we look through your lens, my last question to you is because it's one, climate, okay? Shia, in your opinion, what can we all do on a daily basis with climate? You know, is it taking individual actions? What can we actually do to
Um,
end the climate crisis and move forward?
yeah, so I think that my answer has always been um, ask yourself what you're good at, what your passion is, and use it uh, to be part of the climate movement. So if you're good at photography, try to take photography for a climate organization at least once or twice. How do you uh, give your or lend your skills to the climate movement so that it becomes more diverse, more skillful, more visually appealing, all of those things. But the second thing that I'm gonna say that I've noticed has helped me a lot is reading a lot. So I read a lot now because I'm in school. So I am able to pick things out from my international relations class and my psychology class and my writing seminar class. So all of these things that I'm reading and absorbing actually help me um, like expand my schema of what climate justice is and how we get there. So I would say read about things that you've never read about. Read about things that you think might not be directly connected to climate, but they are in a lot of ways.
I truly thank you for being a part of the youth blueprint that we are creating together with all of our partners. And you continue doing the work. And I want you, to know we're going to continue to support your organization. You know that. And we love you. That's all I can tell you. And Alice says hello.
Hello to Alice as well, and hello to everyone who's watching.
So thanks a lot, Chie, and stay with us just for a moment in the back end, okay? And while we end the broadcast, hold on just a moment.